In the world of true crime, some cases stand out not only for the violence committed, but for the disturbing behavior that surrounds them. This is the case of Grace Jennings, a young woman whose life was cut short in an act of cruelty that shocked an entire nation. What made this story even more horrifying was the way her killers, a couple who had built a presence online, behaved after the crime. They pretended to be insane, posting bizarre TikTok videos and attempting to fool the courts into thinking they had lost their minds. But behind the act was cold calculation, and behind the performance was a brutal murder that could not be hidden. Grace Jennings was described as bright, hopeful, and full of energy. She had her entire life ahead of her, with dreams of a future that now will never be lived. To her family, she was kind-hearted and trusting. To her friends, she was someone who brought laughter into every room. But to the couple who lured her into their world, she was seen as an opportunity, a victim waiting to be exploited. The killers were a couple who thrived on attention. Online, they cultivated an image of rebelliousness, chaos, and unpredictability. Their TikTok account, filled with strange stunts and disturbing clips, gained them notoriety. They enjoyed shocking people, drawing views and comments with their outrageous behavior. But their online persona would eventually blend with their reality in the most horrifying way possible. Investigators later revealed that Grace had crossed paths with the couple through mutual acquaintances. At first, nothing seemed unusual. But beneath the surface, the couple's intentions were dark. They wanted control, they wanted excitement, and most of all, they wanted to test how far they could go. Grace, trusting and unaware of the danger, stepped into their world without realizing it would cost her life. The night of the crime was chaotic. Neighbors reported hearing shouting, crashes, and screams from the couple's apartment. No one called the police at first. Many dismissed it as just another argument. But inside, Grace was trapped in a nightmare. The couple attacked her with shocking brutality. By the time it was over, her body bore the marks of unimaginable violence. It was not just murder. It was torture fueled by rage and cruelty. When police arrived after concerned witnesses finally reported the noise, they were confronted with a scene that left even veteran officers shaken. Grace Jennings was dead. The apartment was in disarray, filled with evidence of violence. And the couple? They were laughing, recording themselves, performing bizarre antics, as if the reality of the crime meant nothing. Some of the footage even made its way onto TikTok, clips where the killers pretended to be insane, acting out as though the entire ordeal was just another show. Detectives immediately recognized that this case was unlike any other. Not only was it a brutal murder, but it was surrounded by a twisted performance for social media. The couple's behavior blurred the lines between reality and performance, leaving investigators disturbed at how deeply their need for attention had merged with their willingness to commit violence. The community's reaction was swift. News of Grace Jennings's death spread quickly, and outrage followed. People were horrified not just by the crime itself, but by the mockery the killers made afterward. The idea that someone could commit such violence and then try to disguise it with acts of insanity online felt like a new, darker chapter in true crime. For Grace's family, the news was unbearable. They had lost a daughter, a sister, a loved one, to cruelty that made no sense. Their grief was only made worse by the sight of the couple's TikTok antics, where the killers seemed to flaunt their lack of remorse. Grace's memory was being overshadowed by the circus her killers created, and the family demanded justice with voices full of sorrow and anger. This was only the beginning of a case that would expose how far people can go to seek attention, and how violence can be turned into performance in the most disturbing ways. The truth about what happened to Grace Jennings would come out in court, and the world would see through the lies and madness. The couple thought they could pretend their way out of guilt, but the evidence would tell a different story. Part 2, the investigation into the murder of Grace Jennings, quickly became one of the most disturbing cases local detectives had ever worked on. From the moment they entered the crime scene, it was clear this was not just a killing. It was a spectacle, staged and twisted, with the killers turning tragedy into performance. The TikTok couple did not flee, did not try to hide what they had done. Instead, they embraced the chaos, filming themselves, laughing, and behaving as though they were characters in a show. Detectives seized their phones and quickly discovered a digital trail that left no doubt about their state of mind. Videos taken hours before and after the murder showed the couple acting erratically. one screaming nonsense into the camera, the other pacing in circles, pretending to lose touch with reality. In one clip, they even suggested they were possessed and could not be held responsible for their actions. It was a disturbing blend of performance and cruelty, designed to convince both the world and eventually the courts that they were insane. But investigators saw through the act. Behind the chaos of the videos was clear evidence of planning. Text messages recovered from the devices revealed discussions between the two about Grace, showing intent long before the night of the murder. They had spoken about luring her, about teaching her a lesson, and even hinted at the violence that would come. Far from random madness, the crime had been deliberate. The forensic team examined the apartment in detail. What they found confirmed the brutality of the attack. Grace had fought back, her injuries proving she had struggled desperately to survive. The violence was excessive, far beyond what was needed to take her life. It was the kind of rage-filled assault that left no doubt about the cruelty of the killers. And yet, instead of remorse, the couple had chosen to dance for cameras, acting unhinged while standing over her body. Neighbors gave chilling testimony about the hours surrounding the murder. Several heard screaming but admitted they did not call police immediately, believing it was just another one of the couple's bizarre episodes. They were known for strange behavior, often shouting and making noise late into the night. It was this reputation that allowed the crime to continue unchecked until it was too late. By the time someone finally called authorities, Grace Jennings was already gone. The couple was arrested on the spot, but even in handcuffs, they kept up their act. One pretended to faint dramatically, while the other shouted incoherently as cameras from nearby reporters captured the spectacle. Detectives were not fooled. They recognized the difference between genuine mental illness and performance, and to them, this was nothing but an act designed to escape responsibility. As the investigation deepened, prosecutors prepared to dismantle the insanity defense the couple was clearly planning. Psychologists were brought in to evaluate them. The results were telling. While the couple displayed erratic behavior in interviews, clinical assessments showed no signs of psychosis or severe mental illness. Instead, experts described them as manipulative, attention-seeking and fully aware of what they had done. The insanity was nothing more than a mask carefully crafted to avoid accountability. Meanwhile, Grace's family grieved publicly. They described her as a young woman with dreams, ambitions, and a bright future stolen from her. Standing in front of reporters, her mother said through tears, "They can pretend all they want, but they knew exactly what they were doing. My daughter is gone, and no act can erase that." Her words captured the anger of a community that wanted nothing less than full justice. Online, the story spread quickly. Clips of the couple's bizarre TikTok videos circulated across platforms, horrifying viewers worldwide. People could not comprehend how two individuals could treat murder like entertainment. Social media became a battleground of outrage, with users demanding harsh punishment and warning about the dangers of platforms where attention seekers could thrive unchecked. For detectives and prosecutors, the focus remained clear. Cut through the performance, expose the truth, and show the jury the reality of Grace Jennings' murder. The evidence was strong, but the couple's act threatened to complicate the trial. If even one juror believed the insanity defense, justice could be delayed or denied. But as the case unfolded, it became clear that no amount of TikTok theatrics could erase the truth. Grace had been brutally murdered, and the couple had chosen not just violence, but a twisted performance of madness to cover their guilt. The stage was set for a trial that would expose everything, from the planning of the crime to the lies told afterward. And when the curtain finally lifted in court, the world would see who they really were. Part 3, the trial of the TikTok couple accused of murdering Grace Jennings, quickly became one of the most talked about cases in the country. From the moment they entered the courtroom, it was clear they intended to keep up the same performance they had begun online, pretending to be insane. They shouted at the ceiling, laughed at inappropriate moments, and even mimicked crying fits that looked more like rehearsed drama than genuine emotion. Reporters described the courtroom as part trial, part theater, a disturbing spectacle where two accused killers seemed more interested in putting on a show than facing justice. But the prosecution was ready. They opened with a calm, steady argument that Grace's murder was not an accident, not a moment of madness, but a calculated act of violence. They presented the text messages exchanged between the couple in the days before the killing. Messages that discussed luring Grace, isolating her, and even using violence. The words written in their own hands cut through every claim of insanity. Planning proved intent, and intent proved guilt. The jury listened as forensic experts described the brutality of the attack. Photos of the crime scene were shown, and the details were so graphic that some jurors looked away. The experts explained that the injuries Grace suffered were the result of sustained violence, not a sudden outburst. It was cruelty, deliberate and prolonged. For the jury, this evidence painted a clear picture. Grace had not just been killed, she had been made to suffer. Then came the testimony of psychologists who had evaluated the couple. The defense had argued that they were mentally unstable, incapable of understanding right from wrong. But the professionals disagreed. The psychologists testified that while the couple displayed narcissistic tendencies and a hunger for attention, they were not insane. They were manipulative. They knew exactly what they were doing. The courtroom grew silent as one expert said, "This was not psychosis. This was a performance." They played insane because it gave them control. Throughout the trial, the couple tried to disrupt the proceedings. At one point, one of them began humming loudly during a witness's testimony, forcing the judge to issue a warning. At another, they shouted nonsense phrases about spirits and voices, only to stop abruptly when the judge threatened removal from the courtroom. These moments revealed their act for what it was, selective and convenient. The jury could see the difference between genuine illness and deliberate showmanship. Grace's family sat through every day of the trial, their faces etched with grief. Her mother often clutched a photo of Grace, holding it tightly as if it gave her strength. When the prosecution described the final moments of Grace's life, her family wept openly. Their pain was undeniable, and their presence in the courtroom reminded everyone of the true victim, the young woman whose life had been stolen. The defense tried to argue that the couple had been under the influence of drugs, and that their mental state was impaired. But the evidence of planning, the videos posted online, and the manipulative behavior after the murder undermined that argument completely. The prosecution reminded the jury of the couple's bizarre TikTok clips filmed after Grace's death, videos where they laughed, danced, and claimed to be possessed. Those clips, meant to support an insanity claim, became instead proof of their cold indifference. By the time closing arguments arrived, the case was clear. The prosecution told the jury, "Grace Jennings is not here today because these two chose to kill her. They chose to plan, they chose to act, and then they chose to mock her memory by pretending to be insane. Do not let their performance distract you from the truth. Justice demands accountability." The defense repeated their plea for leniency, but the damage was done. The jury had seen the evidence, heard the testimony, and witnessed the manipulative behavior firsthand. The courtroom had become a stage, yes, but it was a stage on which the couple had exposed themselves as liars, manipulators, and murderers. As deliberations began, the public outside the courthouse waited anxiously. Crowds held signs demanding justice for Grace. Candlelight vigils were held each evening, her name spoken aloud by strangers who had been moved by her story. And inside, 12 jurors prepared to decide whether the performance of madness could outweigh the mountain of truth. The world was watching, and the answer they delivered would echo far beyond the courtroom walls. Part 4, when the jury returned to the courtroom after hours of deliberation. The silence was deafening. Reporters stopped writing, family members held their breath, and all eyes turned to the foreperson. Grace Jennings's mother clutched a photo of her daughter, her hands trembling. The accused couple sat side by side, smirking and whispering to each other, as if the entire trial was nothing more than another stage for their performance. The judge asked for the verdict, and the word, guilty, echoed through the courtroom. Guilty of murder in the first degree, guilty of conspiracy, guilty of attempting to mislead investigators with claims of insanity. Each count struck like thunder. The couple's smiles faded for the first time since the trial had begun. They shifted uneasily in their seats, suddenly aware that their act had failed. Grace's family burst into tears, hugging one another, their grief mixing with relief. For them, the verdict was not a victory. It could never bring Grace back, but it was a moment of justice, a recognition that her killers could no longer hide behind lies and theatrics. The judge turned to the jury and thanked them for their service, their faces pale but resolute. They had seen through the performance and delivered truth. The judge then addressed the couple directly, condemning their cruelty and their deliberate attempts to mock both the court and Grace's memory. "You turned this tragedy into a show," the judge said firmly. "But justice is not a stage, and this courtroom is not an audience. Your lies end here." With those words, the judge handed down a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Outside the courthouse, the reaction was immediate. Crowds waiting on the steps erupted in applause and tears. People chanted Grace's name, holding candles and photos of her high in the air. News crews broadcast the moment live, capturing the raw emotion of a community that had been following the case from the very beginning. For many, it was a rare moment when justice seemed to triumph over cruelty. Online, the verdict spread like wildfire. Social media platforms that had once been filled with the couple's disturbing videos were now filled with messages of support for Grace's family. Hashtags bearing her name trended worldwide, with users demanding that her memory not be overshadowed by the killers, who had tried to make themselves famous through her suffering. People who had never met Grace wrote about her, sending love to her family and vowing never to forget her story. Meanwhile, inside prison, the couple's behavior changed dramatically. The laughter and theatrics vanished. Guards reported them as withdrawn and bitter, angry not at themselves for what they had done, but at the fact that the world had seen through their lies. Their desperate attempt to paint themselves as insane had collapsed, leaving them with nothing but silence and decades of confinement. For Grace's loved ones, the pain was still immense. They continued to attend vigils, speak at events, and keep her memory alive. Her mother said during a televised interview, "They pretended to be insane. But my daughter's death was real. Her pain was real. And so is our loss. Justice has been served, but our hearts will never heal." The case also left a lasting impact on society. It sparked debates about the role of social media in shaping dangerous behavior. Experts questioned how platforms allowed disturbing content to thrive unchecked, and whether the pursuit of attention had driven the couple to escalate from online chaos to real-world violence. Lawmakers and activists called for reforms, demanding tighter controls and greater accountability. But for most people, the story of Grace Jennings was not about policy. It was about humanity. It was about a young woman whose life was stolen, and the disturbing way her killers tried to turn that tragedy into a performance. It was about a jury who saw through the lies, a community that demanded justice, and a family who fought to ensure Grace's memory lived on. The verdict had been delivered. Justice, though never enough to heal the loss, had been secured. But the story of Grace Jennings was not finished yet. What came next was the legacy she left behind, the lessons learned, and the way her name would be remembered long after the killers had faded into obscurity. Part 5, the trial was over, the guilty verdict delivered, and the couple sentenced to life in prison. But the story of Grace Jennings did not end at the courthouse doors. For her family, friends, and the wider public, the aftermath became a new chapter, a chapter of grief, reflection, and the search for meaning in a tragedy that had been turned into a grotesque performance. Grace's family became the strongest voice in preserving her memory. Her mother and siblings gave interviews where they spoke not of the killers, but of Grace herself. They described her as bright, compassionate, and full of plans for the future. She should be remembered for who she was, not for the people who destroyed her. Her mother said in a broadcast that moved viewers across the nation. Their words shifted the focus away from the theatrics of the trial and back to the victim whose life had been stolen. Community support poured in. Vigils turned into organized memorial events, with hundreds gathering to honor Grace's life. Scholarships were established in her name, aiming to support young women pursuing the dreams Grace never got the chance to chase. At schools, teachers used her story to spark conversations about trust, safety, and the dangers of ignoring warning signs. Grace had become more than a victim. She had become a symbol of resilience and a reason for change. The case also sparked national debate about the influence of social media on dangerous behavior. The killers had thrived on TikTok, feeding off attention and shock value. Experts argued that the constant chase for likes and views blurred the line between reality and performance for them. Lawmakers began pressing for stronger moderation policies, asking whether platforms had a duty to intervene when disturbing content crossed into dangerous territory. The murder of Grace Jennings was no longer just a criminal case. It had become a cultural reckoning. For law enforcement, The case was unforgettable. Detectives admitted that they had never worked on anything quite like it. They were used to brutality, but not brutality mixed with performance. The couple's deliberate attempts to play insane, to manipulate the system, forced investigators and prosecutors to work harder than ever to expose the truth. Their success in cutting through the lies became a model for how future cases might deal with defendants who use performance as a shield. Grace's friends struggled in their own way. Many of them had followed the case in silence, too broken to speak publicly. But after the verdict, some came forward. They shared stories of Grace's laughter, her loyalty, and the little moments that defined her life. One friend told reporters, she loved making others happy. She deserved to be surrounded by that same love. Their memories added a human face to a story that had too often been dominated by the killer's bizarre antics. The couple themselves faded from public conversation. Once the center of attention, they were now just inmates serving life sentences. The act of insanity that they had clung to for so long was seen for what it was, a failed attempt to escape responsibility. In the end, they became defined not by their theatrics, but by their cruelty, remembered only as the ones who took Grace's life. But the legacy of Grace Jennings continued to grow. Documentaries and podcasts retold her story, not to sensationalize her death, but to warn of the dangers of manipulation, attention-seeking, and blind trust in those who crave fame at any cost. Her name became part of a larger conversation about the risks young people face in a world where online personas can mask real-life dangers. Even years later, her family continued to attend vigils and memorial events. They kept her story alive, determined that her memory would not fade into statistics. Grace Jennings became a symbol, not of how she died, but of the need to protect, to listen, and to act when something feels wrong. Her story became a reminder that justice in court is only the beginning. True justice comes when her life inspires change that prevents others from suffering the same fate. Part 6. Even after the verdict and sentencing, the story of Grace Jennings continued to resonate. Her murder was not just another case for the files. It became a lasting reminder of how cruelty, performance, and obsession with attention could blend into something unimaginably dark. Grace's life, though stolen far too soon, became a source of lessons, reforms, and change. Her family refused to let her memory fade. They organized yearly memorials, gathering friends, neighbors, and strangers who had followed the case. At each event, they spoke of Grace not as a victim defined by tragedy, but as a young woman filled with hope, ambition, and love for the people around her. They made sure the world remembered her smile, her kindness, and her dreams. Reminders that her story was not just about how she died, but about who she was. In the wider community, her case led to lasting change. Schools added programs that taught students about personal safety and the importance of speaking up when something feels wrong. Advocacy groups used her story to highlight the dangers of manipulation and control within relationships, especially those fueled by social media fame. Grace's name was carried into campaigns, workshops, and conferences, ensuring her voice lived on even in her absence. On social media, the conversation shifted. Where once the killers had flaunted their twisted performances, now Grace's name became a rallying point for awareness and justice. Hashtags honoring her memory spread across platforms, often tied to messages encouraging people to support survivors and report suspicious behavior. Her story inspired strangers to act, and many survivors of abuse said hearing about Grace gave them the courage to come forward with their own truths. Lawmakers, too, took note. Debates about the role of platforms in amplifying disturbing content grew louder. Some argued that if red flags had been taken more seriously, tragedies like Grace's murder might be prevented. The case sparked discussions on how far people will go for attention and how society must respond when performance crosses into dangerous reality. For investigators and prosecutors, the case remained unforgettable. They had seen brutality before, but never mixed with such deliberate theatrics. Their victory in court, exposing lies, tearing down the facade of insanity, and securing justice, became a model for other cases where defendants try to manipulate the system. The lesson was clear: performance may deceive for a moment, but evidence will always reveal the truth. And for the public, the story of Grace Jennings remained chilling, not because of the violence alone, but because of the mockery that followed it. The couple's attempt to turn murder into a show forced people to confront an unsettling reality in a world obsessed with attention. Some will go to unthinkable extremes to get it. Grace's story became a warning to always see beyond the performance, to recognize that not everything presented as entertainment is harmless. In the end, Grace Jennings's legacy is one of both sorrow and strength. She is remembered as a daughter, a friend, and a bright young woman who deserved so much more. Her killers tried to make themselves the center of attention, but history will not remember them as stars. It will remember them as monsters. Grace's name, however, will live on as a symbol of resilience, truth, and the need to protect those who cannot protect themselves. This case will always give chills, not because it reads like fiction, but because it was real. A life stolen, a family broken, and a society forced to confront the dangers of silence and spectacle. Grace Jennings's story will never be forgotten, because through it, countless others may be saved.